Still calling your congressman? Waiting on hold? Hoping someone took your message?
Thank you for calling.
There's a better way to do this. The Maha Legislative Tracker lets you browse every Maha bill. Pick the ones that matter to you and send a letter to your rep with a single click. Search federal, by state, or by the issues you care about most. Take 60 seconds and make it count. Your voice can make America healthy again at mahaaction.org.
There was a time when the news delivered truth,
It still seems like a dream.
when integrity was paramount,
I cannot contend that I have always been right or wise.
and trusted voices guided a nation.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment?
Today, the headlines are blurred, the signal lost in the noise of corporate agendas and paid narratives.
Vocal anti-vaxxer.
Deranged lies.
It is humiliating.
What happened to the truth? It hasn't disappeared. It's simply moved. The Maha Report brings you unfiltered, independent journalism covering the issues of the Make America Healthy Again movement. Rediscover the facts and reclaim the truth. Subscribe now at themahareport.com.
Welcome to the Maha Media Hub, and welcome to the Maha Revolution. I'm Tony Lyons, president of Maha Action. So, today we're going to talk about something that sits underneath every other fight we have, because if we lose this one, we lose all of them. I'm talking about censorship, and I'm talking about propaganda. The quiet machinery that decides what you're allowed to find and what you're allowed to read, and ultimately what you're allowed to think. Here's the thing. You can win the argument on science. You can have the data, the studies, the real world evidence on your side, and it won't matter one bit if the American people can never find it. That's the game. They don't have to beat you on the ideas. They just have to make sure your ideas never see the light of day. For years, that's exactly what happened to this movement. Bobby Kennedy's The Real Anthony Fauci, arguably the most important book of our generation, sold 1.4 million copies and was, at the same time, probably the most censored book in recent history. When it came out, it wouldn't appear in search results on Amazon or anywhere else, and you had to type in the entire title on the search bar in order to find it. And when you finally located the listing, at the very top, there was a listing, there was a reference to the CDC website, basically telling you that if you wanted to learn real science, you should go to the CDC website. So, this kind of propaganda and the fact that it wasn't available in bookstores or libraries or on most websites, wasn't reviewed in any newspaper, and it was lowered on every bestseller list from the actual sales. So this book was called Misinformation. It was called a dangerous book. So think about that. It's a runaway bestseller. It sells more than 90,000 copies in its first week. But but the American public is told not to read it. And the gatekeepers tried to bury it in every way that they could. So that's not the free marketplace of ideas. That's a rigged system. So let's talk about how this rigging actually works, because most people don't see it. It starts with search. When you type in a question in Google, you probably assume you're getting the best answer, or at least the most relevant one. But you're not. You're getting the answer that someone has decided you should see. So you type in a question about vaccine safety, for example, or about a particular drug, or about an alternative treatment. And what comes up first, time after time, it's the same official sources pushing you. And, they want you to avoid dissenting voices. They don't want you to see independent researchers or doctors asking hard questions. So those questions, those perspectives are buried on page 5 or page 10, or they're scrubbed entirely so that you will not find them. Most people never click past the first few results. And the people who design these systems, they know that. So the ranking becomes the censorship. They don't have to delete anything necessarily. They just have to make sure that you never scroll far enough to find it. Then there's Wikipedia, often the first source that comes up in that same Google search. And a lot of people still treat it like it's a neutral encyclopedia. It's the people's reference, written by everybody, owned by nobody. But that's just the myth. The reality is that on any contested topic, only a small number of anonymous editors control that page. And we know who those people are. They're not working for you. They decide which sources count and which don't. And those sources, the ones they trust, are the very same legacy media outlets that have spent years smearing this movement, while independent voices get dismissed as unreliable or as misinformation. The co-founder of Wikipedia himself, Larry Sanger, has said that the site abandoned its original commitment to neutrality. And we know that it went much further. So try editing the page of anyone in the Maha world, and you see how long your edit will last. Minutes, maybe less. It gets reverted, the page gets locked, and the official narrative snaps right back into place. And here's the part that should keep you up all night. We Americans like to tell ourselves that we live in a free society. After all, we have the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of speech. But, everybody, so in old communist countries, censorship was out in the open. Everybody knew that the state ran the newspapers. The state controlled the narrative. So everybody knew that the official story was just the official story, that there were no facts behind it. The lie was obvious, so people developed a kind of immunity to that kind of censorship and propaganda. And they learned to look between the lines, to read between the lines. And they trusted their own intuition over the headlines. They knew they were being lied to, and that knowledge protected them and made them stronger. Here it's been the opposite, and that's what makes it much worse. Here most people, not so much now, but historically most people genuinely believe that they have free and open access to the truth. They believe Google just shows them what's relevant. They believe Wikipedia is neutral. They believe that the fact checkers are there to protect them. They believe that the New York Times is practicing real journalism. And because they trust the system, they never think to question it. A man who knows he's in a cage can look for a door out, look for a way out. A man who's been convinced he's already free will never even look. So that's the more sophisticated, more dangerous form of control, the kind that doesn't feel like you're being controlled. It's subtle. It's a shadow ban. A controversial post mysteriously reaches almost no one. It's an algorithm that throttles one voice and amplifies another voice. And sometimes it's even quieter than that. A meaningless book, a book with no reason, that no reasonable person would read, like Jill Biden's book, gets listed as a #1 New York Times bestseller. This is a book stacked up everywhere, just prepared to sell, called by the New York Times the book everyone's going to be reading. But at the very same time, Eric Metaxas's patriotic book, Revolution, is mysteriously banned in bookstores all across the country, and that's not mentioned anywhere. Barnes & Noble doesn't carry a single store. 600 privately owned stores do not have a single copy. But the New York Times then, even though it outsells Jill Biden's book by almost 100%, shows up behind Jill Biden's book on the New York Times bestseller list. So our controlled information ecosystem is filled with examples of this kind of thing. And, Martin Luther King said it better than I could ever say it. He said, all we say in America, he said, is be true to what you said on paper. Somewhere I read of freedom of speech, he says. Somewhere I read of freedom of the press. So he was trying to hold this country to his own promise, to the promise that it made to all of us. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not asking for anything radical. We're asking America to be true to what it says in the Bill of Rights and in the Constitution. So I do want to point to one example where control is not so subtle. On a recent JP Morgan client call with, hundreds, if not thousands of influential and important investors all around the country, they brought up the issue of Secretary Kennedy. They brought him up in this presentation, and what they said was, and what people heard was nothing less than big pharma propaganda, making it even into that. So they said he was anti-science, that he was dangerous, that the system wasn't working, that the system was beautiful before, and that now it's broken. So we know, all of us watching this show, know that he's dangerous to a corrupt system that has prioritized profits over people for a generation, that has failed the American people, and that the reforms that are underway now at HHS are focused on increasing transparency, reevaluating conflicts of interest, demanding higher standards of science, and addressing the chronic disease epidemic that has worsened despite decades of astronomical spending. So none of that is dangerous to Maha moms. None of that is dangerous to anybody watching this show. It's only dangerous to this corrupt system. And so, the good news for us is that, we've been poisoned for a generation. And these companies, they see Bobby Kennedy and they see us as an incredible danger for the people who want to continue poisoning our children and all of us. So, we want ordinary people to be able to make informed decisions with the advice of their doctors about their own health, their own kids, their own lives. So we're not anti anything. We just want real science, not the corporate corrupt kind, and a chance to, explain where Maha stands. So, here's where we are. We're going to keep telling the truth on every channel that will allow us to, that they haven't managed to close, through books, through films, through Substack, through the thousands of influencers that are listening to this call. And those influencers, we know they reach hundreds of millions of Americans every single day. And, precisely because the old gatekeepers, they just can't shut them up and they can't close them down. So every time they censor a voice, this movement gets louder and much more powerful. That's the part they don't understand. Too many people finally know how the system works. And we have a, tremendous lineup today of guests who are part of this fight, who've lived this fight, people who've been slandered, canceled, deplatformed, demonetized, buried in the search rankings and smeared on their own Wikipedia pages, but people who kept telling the truth anyway. So today we'll be joined by U.S. Senator for Kentucky, Rand Paul, and the FDA's Deputy Commissioner for Policy Legislation, Grace Graham, Michael Pack, Director of the Lockdown Dissidents, and then you'll also hear from some of the most censored voices in the Maha movement. Gastroenterologist, film director, and author Dr. Andrew Wakefield, the knowledge doctor, Dr. Eric Berg, COVID vaccine injury treatment specialist, author, and researcher, Dr. Pierre Corey, professor of medicine and specialist in internal medicine and homeopathy, Dr. Michael Frost, and then the CEO of Children's Health Defense, Mary Holland, and finally, our very own Russell Brand. So first up, we have Congresswoman. Andrew Wakefield. And, there's a quick story that I would like to tell you about Dr. Andrew Wakefield. So when I first published his book, this is more than 10 years back, I was reading it carefully before publication. And there's this incredible story in there where at the time when he was being attacked and vilified, they were somehow able to make it a question on the test that every teenager in the UK took that asked them, who is the now discredited doctor who falsely claimed that there could be a link between vaccines and autism? So to graduate school in the UK, you had to know a particular narrative that was a lie, that was a made-up story, that was meant to vilify a doctor. So this is Dr. Andrew Wakefield. I'm thrilled to have you on, and welcome to our show.
Let's get on. Okay, can you hear me? Great. It's
Yes.
wonderful to be on. Thank you so much. The issue of censorship is very close to my heart. It started for us. My first real experience of this was with Vaxxed being accepted into Tribeca Film Festival, run by Robert De Niro, a great film festival. We were delighted, and then it was cancelled. It was cancelled for obvious reasons. And it was a very dark time. A few weeks later, Robert De Niro went on the Today Show, Good Morning America, and all the others to talk about Tribeca. And the only thing that he would talk about is the cancelled film Vaxxed. And he said we should have played that film. Everybody should be entitled to make up their own minds about this issue. We were wrong to have done it. And the film exploded worldwide, became one of the preeminent documentary films of 2016. And there was an instance where censorship backfired on them in the biggest way. Now it's assumed a kind of quieter, more subtle, insidious presence in everything we do. But, and this is the last note I'll mention about this, is they're losing. They're losing very, very badly. There is a mass action effect taking place in this country, and it's come about because of the power of counter media, its power of books and of film to communicate important messages to a wide public. And that has been extremely important. The other is COVID. COVID was the biggest mistake they've ever made in public health, absolute catastrophe for them. And the more Tony Fauci and others lie in front of Congress, and that becomes manifestly obvious by disclosures, then it's a disaster for them because it magnifies the problem manyfold. And so now I think when I first got involved in this over 31 years ago, there were a handful of people worldwide prepared to discuss the thorny issue of vaccine safety. And now it's more than half the adult population of the world, I would estimate, in the wake of COVID. So we are winning. And one of the most effective mechanisms that Tony referred to for disseminating the message of this community is through social media, that alternative media that has now assumed a much more important role in the public discourse than mainstream media. I'm here today to talk about a book in particular that's coming out on Friday. And the origin of this book, I was at a conference many years ago, 2010, and a mother who had organized the conference had a single child, severely affected, nonverbal child with autism, and just that one child. And that night she took me out for dinner. And over dinner, she asked me if I would father a child for her. Now, you may think, what an extraordinary thing to bring up on a Maha move. What is heaven's name has that got to do with anything? But what her anxiety, her reasoning was symptomatic of a far greater issue, and that was this. Millions of American parents and parents around the world, the thing that keeps them awake at night is what happens to my child when I become infirm or die, and there is no one to care for them. Often this falls to siblings. If there are no siblings, then that is a huge problem. And at the moment, given the lack of provision for these children, many will die on the streets. And what I've seen in my early years in autism was a spate of suicides and murder-suicides of mothers and their children. It is a massive issue. What this woman wanted was not a night of passion with Andy Wakefield. She wanted to conceive and to have a healthy child who would look after her son when she was no longer there. And this is a major issue globally for parents of affected children. I was so inspired by her courage to ask and her motive, her love as a mother for her child, that I wrote this as a screenplay then, and I put it on the shelf in the belief that it would become relevant later. I then decided, I was persuaded to write a book about it, to get it out there. It's much cheaper to get a book out than it is a movie, with the hope that it inspires a movie to be produced. And so that is what I did. It's called The Bequest, and it's a Western. Why a Western? Because I wanted to take it away from a time when the issue of causation was the contentious one of vaccines or not vaccines, not for any reason other than to focus exclusively on the issue of what happens when I am no longer there. And I put it on the Oregon Trail in 1867, one of the harshest environments imaginable in the world, so that everything is thrown at this mother and her child in order to make their life insufferable, intolerable, and lead where it may. The other thing to mention, given that Tony a month ago brought up this issue of spellers, is that spellers plays into this story in a very big way, and is part of the ultimate solution. I think I've run over time, and so I will stop there.
Thanks, Andy. And you were really the first major medical scapegoat, and you were sort of a cautionary tale about what can happen when you stand up and you question everything, or when you go up against some of these incredibly powerful forces who are making huge sums of money at the expense of millions of children all around the world. So, I just want to thank you for fighting so hard for so long, and for being the first one out there saying things that nobody could imagine could be true, for some of the reasons that I mentioned at the start, because the propaganda was so good and the censorship was so strong that people actually just believed that they wouldn't be lied to, that the government just would always tell the truth, and that they could trust their children's lives with what the government said. So I just feel that all of us watching this show, ought to be grateful for what you withstood, what you suffered through. And so just thank you. And
thank you so much. Thank you, Tony.
Next up, we have Russell Brand. Sorry, my monitor switched names on me. But Russell Brand has, like I've said before, he's been wrongly accused, vilified, persecuted, deplatformed, demonetized, censored, persecuted, prosecuted. So in somewhat of the same way, and by the same government who really went after Dr. Andrew Wakefield. But, like Dr. Andrew Wakefield, he has always stood by his convictions. He's an incredibly brave guy. He just comes right out and says just boldly and bravely and honestly what he believes. And it's just so quick and so intelligent and so funny, and such a gift to all of us, in the Maha movement, outside of the Maha movement. And he's written this great book that I always want to mention, and it's called How to Become a Christian in 7 Days. And that book itself is being censored and deplatformed, and is actually difficult to find. It's not in all kinds of stores in the UK, not in stores in the US, taken off websites, all of that sort of stuff. So take a look at the book, think about it, recognize that, and the same thing with Dr. Wakefield's book. These are books that powerful people don't want you to read, and that's a reason that you should read them. So, and do it while you still can, and do it as a way to prevent censorship. So anyway, Russell, welcome. Great to see you again.
Hey, all right. It's lovely to see you, Tony. And it's also lovely to follow Andrew Wakefield, who I was fortunate enough to meet at an event for the Children's Defense Organization. Is it called? I'm not sure the full name of that. Children's Health Defense. He was pretty enchanting and lovely gentleman who's, as you remarked, endured a great deal for being honest in a field where truth is supposed to be precisely what they're pursuing. I saw and was watching just before I came on Tulsi Gabbard's part in announcement and revelations around Anthony Fauci, including the documentation of his corruption and deception and his involvement in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, stuff that was, of course, chronicled in a book that you published and that Secretary Kennedy wrote, The Real Anthony Fauci, which when I first read that book, I thought, like you said about Andrew Wakefield, this simply cannot be true. I can't adjust to a reality where Anthony Fauci is kind of a villainous individual whose conduct during the AIDS outbreak and crisis was an indication of how he would ultimately behave or eventually behave in the COVID crisis. And even when I was watching Tulsi Gabbard, who's one of the good guys, ain't she? It's a loss, and I hope that her husband Abraham gets well. Praying for that beautiful fellow. Like that, she's leaving, she's departing, she's gone out with some significant revelations about a man who, at the height of that pandemic, at least when it reached your country, I can list when he was, I remember James Corden, who's a fellow Brit and a person I care about. He did a sort of a gala about Anthony Fauci. There was a sort of an elaborate street dance a la Fame where they celebrated Fauci when the vaccine was introduced or when there was some cessation in the lockdown. Thank you, Fauci. Of course, all of us remember Stephen Colbert dressing up as a syringe. Stephen Colbert, who never misses an opportunity to condemn and deride Secretary Kennedy. I remember seeing him, Anthony Fauci, so it was just sort of celebrated and near deified. I remember watching the BBC do a sort of a puff piece that stopped only just short of fellatio in declaring Anthony Fauci's incredible abilities, like asking him about his workout routine. And, before I knew about Dr. Wakefield, I would have, the only information I would have had access to was, well, this guy, he's a quack, he's a crackpot, he's a liar, he's dangerously irresponsible. The degree that they will go to, and when I say they, I mean these sets of institutions that have bureaucratic regulatory arms, that have commercial and corporate entities and institutions as a significant portion of their power, as well as sometimes entire governmental departments that operate not on a national level, but on an international and indeed global level. The level of deception that they're able to create is kind of marvelous, a kind of marvelous sheath, a total veil can be drawn across reality where if you were to read the available information, you would assume that Anthony Fauci was a hero and Andrew Wakefield a corrupt quack and an imbecile and a lunatic. And the reality is entirely the opposite. Of course, there is great precedent for this where, I see my book is, you're promoting the book that we've done together, actually. If God's self, as he did, comes to earth to show you how to live, to absorb the malfeasance impossible for mere humans to consume, he will be inevitably condemned and derided and betrayed by the very people that ought be most invested in supporting him, revering him, loving and worshipping him. No human being can be compared to Christ, of course, and yet we all bear the image of God. And through his sacrifice, we may all walk with him. What does that mean in practice? It means that if you're willing, as he did, to lay down your life for the people you love and for what you believe in, the cause, the purpose that directs your life, then you are a participant in his grace. And if you are not, then I suppose that's a question that we all have to ask of ourselves and sometimes of one another. What are you really in this for? That's why, if we're able to make even so much as a cent out of this book, Tony, I guess we've got to do something worthwhile with it, because I don't want to participate in this game no more. It's not like I detest and I'm sickened by the culture. although I am. It's just that I don't want its tendrils on me no more, Tony.
Well, I don't blame you. And you brought up that when Fauci left, the whole world was kind of saying to him, "Thank you, Dr. Fauci." And I think in some sense we can thank Dr. Fauci for his corruption, his deception, for his, the fact that he lied his way to the top, the fact that he poisoned people for a generation, for all the terrible things that he did for 50 years. And yet he set us up for this sort of awakening that, we were just slowly and steadily getting more and more blind. And he opened our eyes. And we all know now that they want us to believe that Bobby Kennedy is dangerous, that Andrew Wakefield is dangerous, that you're dangerous. And, I would say I'm willing to take that risk, with dangerous people like you who have purpose, who are honest, who are really trying to do something good in this world. And that I know is the reason why you wrote that book, How to Become a Christian in 7 Days, that you wrote that because you want to tell your story and you want to make people's lives more meaningful, more purposeful, more filled with faith. And, so thank you to Dr. Fauci for setting the whole world up in a moment where they could actually change, where they could actually have a revelation, a transformation. And I think that moment is now. And that's what the Maha movement really wants, is that we want everybody to take their lives back, to take their health back, their faith back, their sense of purpose back. So thank you, Russell Brand.
Thanks, Tony. I love you, mate.
Love you too. Next up, we have Grace Graham, and Grace is the FDA's Deputy Commissioner for Policy, Legislation, and International Affairs. Her office serves as the FDA's focal point for engagement with the U.S. Congress, the administration, her global counterparts and partners at the state and local level, and even territorial and tribal policymakers. So she joins us today to discuss the new FDA announcement that it's going to accelerate clinical trials, make those clinical trials better, and give Americans faster access to groundbreaking medicine. So Grace, thank you for coming on. Great to have you with us.
Great to join you, and thank you. Hard to follow Russell Brand, and I know Acting Commissioner Diamantis has been a guest at the past and was disappointed he couldn't make it today. But I'm very happy to be here. It's really an all of HHS effort that was launched this week. Secretary Kennedy charged all of us with how do we get better data for Americans about the medical products that they are taking when we are seeing more and more of these clinical trials go overseas outside the US, especially to China, early stage in Australia as well. And so he tasked us with day one across the department, what can we do? And so Monday was the start where we rolled out a number of efforts and initiatives to both, while reducing the time and cost, so American patients can get early access to these innovative, exciting treatments. We're still generating the gold standard science and data we need to make these decisions, but to do it in a way where FDA isn't asking unnecessary questions or really focusing on what we need to know, what Americans and their patients and their doctors need to know so they can move forward with these treatments. What can we do so patients can more easily participate in clinical trials? What, as talking about NIH, if they're working with an academic medical center, what can we do to make sure that data is transparent, collected appropriately, and they're doing what they can to reach out and get the best participation in clinical trials. So they're not spending 8 months to a year after your FDA says, yes, patients should have this in a clinical trial. It shouldn't take 8 months to get the first patient enrolled. And so how do we make sure that HHS and working with all of you, academic medical centers, experts across the spectrum, across the field, you have a good idea that can help patients. We don't want to be in the way. We want to get that good data so doctors and patients can be informed. And we want that data to be collected in the United States. And so that's really what the goal was, the announcement this week. released a roadmap. Secretary Kennedy released a roadmap about what we're doing, what we did Monday, what's going to be coming out in the near future. We welcome feedback on all of these initiatives. A number are posted publicly, so you can see what's the type of data. A big component of this and a big priority is moving away from the use of animals in any of this testing, how to use novel technology. There's a policy FDA released on Monday as well that will help facilitate moving away from animal testing as quickly as we possibly can. And so really encourage you to look at that information on the website. I know some have gone over, so I'm happy to give some time back to you to try to stay on track, but really, again, pleased to join you today. And I know Commissioner DeMontis wanted to be here and encourage you to look at that. And please give us feedback on what more we can do to have the right data that patients, doctors can rely on that's generated here in the United States. We are all ears and look forward to working together on this effort.
Thanks, Grace. And, so critical. And it's something that I've heard for years is that people have good ideas. They have new cancer treatments. They have all kinds of things that they think could make lives better. And yet they've had trouble making it through the system. So it's just such great news. And I'm sure that it's music to the ears of so many really smart people who have those good ideas, want to get their products to market, want to get their treatments to the marketplace, to people who really need them. And so this is great news. And thanks for bringing it to us. Next up, we have Dr. Michael Frost, and he was trained first in conventional medicine, and he worked, at the Medical University of Vienna. But due to personal health challenges, he began bringing in homeopathy to his practice, recognizing its potential as a complementary therapy. And he's here to discuss his research and success using homeopathy alongside conventional treatments in critical care settings. So thanks, Dr. Frost, for joining us today.
Thank you for the possibility to speak here. I just want to talk about the debate over homeopathy, which has been going on for decades. It has claimed that there are no scientific studies on homeopathy. That is not true. There are excellent review articles, such as the one by Hamre 2023, which clearly shows that homeopathy is effective and has a greater effect than a placebo. However, evidence-based medicine encompasses not only studies, but also clinical experience and patients' preferences. Increasingly, peer-reviewed homeopathic studies that have been accepted and published in renowned scientific journals are being retracted for flimsy reasons. A study published under my direction showed that adjunctive homeopathic treatment improves quality of life and prolongs survival in patients with advanced stages of lung cancer. The study was conducted to the highest scientific standards at the Medical University of Vienna and published in 2020 in the journal The Oncologist. This study was attacked, prompting the Austrian Agency for Scientific Integrity to issue a final statement alleging data manipulation and falsification. While the journal confirmed the integrity of the study in 2024, just 1 year later, 5 years after publication, the journal retracted the study for the following reasons. The study was deemed irreproducible because the patients had been treated on an individual basis. Furthermore, I was wrongly accused of having marketed homeopathic remedies. Dr. Menachem Oberbaum from Jerusalem conducted a study in India comparing homeopathic and conventional treatment in newborns ranging in age from birth to 2 years. The results indicate significantly better outcomes in the homeopathy group than in the conventional group, such as a lower incidence of upper respiratory tract infections. The European Journal of Pediatrics recorded over 30,000 downloads. The retraction took place without a counter-statement from the authors, as the study was not compared with a placebo and was not conducted as a double-blind trial, even though the journal had previously published several studies with a similar design. Based on a new argument from the Committee on Publication Ethics, the article was retracted because the journal had lost confidence in it. In April 2020, the journal PLOS ONE retracted an original research article published in 2015 by Emma Macias Cortes from Mexico. 133 peri- and postmenopausal women with moderate to severe major depression were randomized into 3 groups: individualized homeopathic treatment plus placebo fluoxetine, fluoxetine plus placebo homeopathic treatment, and double placebo. The homeopathic group was found to be more effective than the placebo group in alleviating depression. Emma's team addressed all the concerns raised by the current editors of PLOS ONE, concerns which would normally have been addressed in a scientific manner. In 2019, the same journal, PLOS ONE, retracted an article about stimulation of gene expression by Arnica montana, a homeopathic substance, which was published 3 years earlier by Paolo Bellavite from Verona in Italy. The results presented in the study showed for the first time that the stimulating effect of Arnica montana led to an increase in gene expression even at higher dilutions. Unknown individuals filed a complaint with the editor, who posed several technical questions to Paolo, to which he provided entirely satisfactory answers. However, the article was withdrawn nonetheless on the grounds that concerns were raised regarding the concentration of Arnica montana used in the experiments and regarding whether there is sufficient evidence that biochemically active constituents remain in the diluted solutions used in the experiments. As scientists, our aim is to use our work to help people who are suffering. It is unethical to retract outstanding research findings at university level and to damage our reputation through false claims. Ethical legitimacy in such cases demands a clear separation of roles. Yet, in the current publishing models, the editorial boards act simultaneously as investigators, prosecutors, and judges, leaving the author without a defense advocate. If these elements are missing, there's a risk that redaction will function as a sanction rather than as an evaluative act.
Thanks, Dr. Frost. And, it's such a tragedy that so many doctors, so many scientists have been attacked, in the last generation, had their research retracted, had their websites taken down, been fired from their jobs, really, really suffered. Even in many states in this country, people had their medical licenses taken from them. And, all of that, I believe, came because they were a challenge to a small number of multi-billion-dollar companies and products that they produced or drugs that they produced. And, it had nothing to do with the welfare of actual patients. So, thank you for the research you've done. And I'm sorry to hear that you were treated in that kind of way and that patients had to suffer because of those kinds of retractions. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Next up, we have one of the great heroes of the whole COVID era, and I'm spelling that both ways. He's a critical care physician who bravely spoke out during that whole COVID period and focused on ivermectin, and later wrote the best-selling book with that title, the war on ivermectin. And his most recent titles, have really been just great books. And he's really stood up to such incredibly powerful forces, had no fear whatsoever. And like many people who come on this Zoom call, really is just brave and really just has fought for the health of his patients and for the health of all of us. So thank you, Dr. Corey, for the work that you've done and that you keep doing, and the terrific books that you've been writing.
Yeah, Tony, thank you. You helped me with my first book, and that book was really inspired over the idea of censorship and propaganda. I mean, I have to be honest. Before COVID, I don't think I had any sense of the scope and scale of propaganda and censorship and how rife it is in society. I mean, I used to read the New York Times. I thought it was the paper of record, the arbiter of truth. And now I read it, and I literally, every sentence of every headline article, there's propaganda, which is a story or a message that wants you to think or act in a certain way. And we're bombarded with these messages on who to like and who to hate and who's right and who's wrong. And our heads swim if you don't know that they're doing that. And, I've learned so much about it. In the book, The War on Ivermectin, I started as I became expert on a topic during a pandemic because I was trying to help people. I was trying to find a medicine that would get us out of this nonsense. And I found that the more and more true things I found about this medicine, the more and more lies I saw in the media. And then when I would try to bring that out, the attacks that came at me for just trying to speak a truth and a truth and a humanitarian truth, the truth that could help people save their lives. And, I think it's important that we remember, right, the censorship and propaganda, right? A lot of the censorship is around scandals and fraud and like these criminals who are doing these crimes. But when you censor science, and in particular medicine, people die as a result. This is deadly stuff that they're doing. When they don't want you to know about a potential curative therapy that could help you either with a chronic or an acute disease or life-threatening disease, people die. And I had to see hundreds of thousands, if not millions around the world, die as a result of the censorship of the lethality and toxicity of vaccines and the censorship of early repurposed drug treatments. I mean, it was a humanitarian catastrophe that I think is in the rear view mirror of most of society around the world. They don't know exactly what happened. I think that if they think that everyone died of COVID, no, they died because they were deprived of treatments. And then I have to learn about the forms of censorship that goes on. And for me, one of the most shocking was at the level of the medical journals. I had investigators from around the world who had conducted ivermectin trials who were writing to me saying they could not get any of their studies accepted in anything but like a third or a fourth tier journal. The high impact journals, they would only take manipulated trials which showed that these early treatments didn't work. And I watched that play out in real time. And, just to remind everyone, there are former editors of these major journals. There's Peter Goche, who helped found the Cochrane collaboration, one of the top journals of meta-analyses in the world. He has called the pharmaceutical industry a criminal syndicate. They act like the mob, and they have immense power and tools, and they wield censorship and propaganda like nobody's business, and they do it to a deadly extent. And one of the worst forms of censorship, and I think Tony, you touched on it earlier, but it's this attacking of credibility. The way that they went after Andy, the way they went after Bobby. When I look at Bobby's life and everything that he did and what he did with water keepers, right? When he was trying to get mercury out of the water, I love that joke, right? When he was trying to get mercury out of the water, they didn't call him anti-fish, and then when he was trying to get the mercury out of the vaccines, they called him anti-vax. They should have called him pro-children. And he has been one of the most maligned figures for 18 years. And he walks tall. He keeps going. He doesn't listen. I have a lot of admiration for the man for the stuff that he got. And I just want to share with you an anecdote because I saw this thing play out in real time. And it was just an odd experience in my life because I knew what was going to happen. But as you guys know, that I got my 3 specialty board certifications revoked. It doesn't mean I can't practice medicine, but those were badges of distinction that I had earned because I'd been a highly productive and well-known practitioner across 3 specialties. And those specialty boards accused me and my partner, Paul Marek, of misinformation around early treatments and vaccines. And we got a lawyer. We argued with their accusations. We buried them with all sorts of data to show that their accusations were not only incorrect, but poorly founded. And we went through every step of the process. We did the appeal, we did this. And at the final juncture, I'll just finish here, but at the final juncture, Paul and I, we actually were on the same Zoom. He was at my house, and we were before a panel of doctors. And I remember to this day, Paul telling me, so we presented these doctors, the doctors were asking us questions. We answered every single one of them emphatically, data-driven, evidence-based, sound reasoning. And at the end of that call, I remember Paul telling me, he looks at me, he says, I think we're going to be okay. I think, those doctors, they could tell that we're not misinformation. They could tell that we're experts. They could tell that we've studied this stuff. And I looked at him, I said, Paul, are you kidding me? You think this is about those guys on the screen at that panel? This is a foregone conclusion. They need to take our boards away so that my life is the way it is now. Anytime I try to speak in public, anytime I'm mentioned in a newspaper or anything, it is always preceded by discredited or disgraced or board revoked doctor. They just have to put that tag on you because it's like putting a duct tape over your mouth because no one listens to what you say because you're discredited. And I think that's one of the harshest ways of doing it. I just wanted to talk about that today. So thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. It is really like 1984 that the people who lied to the public for all these years, they rose to the top. They became heroes. They defended the people who were poisoning the American public. And people like you who were trying so hard to protect your patients, you guys suffered. You suffered personally. And, once again, I've said this now 5 times today, but, you were, the public was told that you were dangerous, that you were a threat. And the point is that you were a threat to a certain kind of narrative, to a certain kind of way of doing business. You were a danger to the business of public health, but you were an incredible benefit to actual health and to the possible future of health. Because if people like you didn't stand up to these people, then it would have been game over, because it was a total takeover. So, they're not like mobsters. They are the mob. But the whole country then becomes like the mafia, that they can do anything they want. And the worst things that they could do, the worst things that anybody could do to anybody else in this world becomes legal, that there's no liability for it, no punishment for it. So it's going to be a great time when, and it's starting to happen, when people like you are vindicated and when it's public and when Fauci has a perp walk and is put into a car and driven to prison, that's the time we're all waiting for. But I think that's what this is all about. The Maha movement is bringing back a sense of the truth, and the whole public now really is at a point where they recognize that this happened and that they've been lied to and that they want to get to the bottom of it. And to a great extent, that's because of you and people like you. So thank you. Next up, we have Michael Pack, and he is the president and CEO of Palladium Pictures. And it's a company launched in 2023 with his wife and co-producer Gina Capo Pack. And Palladium focuses on high-quality documentaries that reclaim cultural narratives through compelling storytelling. He's the producer and director of Lockdown Dissidents, and strangely, it's a Wall Street Journal documentary. Not exactly sure what that means, but I assume that they funded it, and they have not by any means been perfect through this whole period. But it is nice to see that some of the companies that did really bad things during COVID, said things, published things that were just not true, didn't defend the right people, are now finding their way clear to promoting and funding work like this. So, Michael, thanks for coming on and thanks for making the documentary.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. Yes, it's true. My company, my wife and I have been making documentaries for many years. We've done over 15. We worked on one that sort of involved you, Tony, the one Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words. As you know, you published the book connected to that film. But now we have this partnership with the Wall Street Journal opinion section, and we want to do a series of shorter films, half-hour films that deal with issues and events from the recent past that have been misunderstood or misreported. And lockdowns are a clear example of that. And these are all free, not behind the Wall Street Journal paywalls. So anyone on this call can go and watch it. They can go to WSJ.com and search for Lockdown Dissidents or their YouTube page, or go to WSJ.com/opinion docs and see all three of the ones we've done, or our website, Palladium Pictures, and find out all of our films. But just to defend and one of the reasons I'm happy to be partnered with Wall Street Journal is I trying to tell these stories and reach people who maybe aren't in the MAHA movement or don't read conservative press and are undecided, and try to tell them the story so they understand it. Not to advocate a point of view, but tell them what happened, what these dissidents were like, and what their views were. And I have to say, in defense of my partner, the Wall Street Journal opinion section, not the news section, the opinion section, they were way ahead of everybody on this. They published Scott Atlas and Jay Bhattacharya in March of 2020, and they wrote editorials in defense of them throughout COVID. So I think they've actually been ahead of almost everybody else, maybe not the news section always. In any case, this film tells that story. This is a story probably well known to your people on this call, but we begin with the virus starting in Wuhan in December of 2019, where they locked down the whole city. WHO went there, declared lockdowns a success, an approach that had never been used in pandemics before. Locking down entire cities and countries was implemented around the world. And we focus on the people who were skeptical right away. Jay Bhattacharya in March, he's one of the people we focus on. As you people probably know, he did a study in Santa Clara County that already approved, only a few months into the pandemic, that it disproportionately affected older people. And they recommended focused protection. Let's take care of the old people and let young people go about their business, and especially reopen schools. And that was largely ignored, and they were persecuted, just like the previous two guests on this call were mentioning. They were attacked, they were persecuted. And then, we also focused on Scott Atlas, who was invited by Trump to be in the COVID task force, but he was marginalized and views were forced out. And he tells the story of first meeting with Anthony Fauci. Fauci says to him, "The problem is the public isn't afraid enough. We need to make the public more afraid so they'll listen to us." As he said, that is really an unethical way to do public health. And we talk about what happened inside that politically. And then he invited Jay Bhattacharya and others to come to the White House. On the way, they did the Great Barrington Declaration, which was Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, Zanettra Gupta from Oxford, and they recommended focused protection. This was already October, and they were immediately attacked. Francis Collins, head of the NIH at that time, wrote to Anthony Fauci saying we need a devastating takedown of them. And they're fringe epidemiologists, even though they were from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. And it was the suppression of science that the previous person mentioned. We gave up a lot of our freedoms during COVID, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. But maybe the worst was the suppression of science. The end of the film, we look at how, through the Twitter files and other things, it came to light the government was actively suppressing Jay and Scott Atlas and others on Facebook and Twitter and social media, suppressing their speech, asking those platforms to deboost them or in some places just to shadow ban them. And, we can't have science if one view of science is suppressed, right or wrong. They turned out to be right, but even if they were wrong. So we try to tell that story as a narrative, as an interesting, fascinating narrative to people who may not have heard about it. And I hope that everyone on this call watches, since it's free, and recommends their friends watch it, and especially friends that don't agree with them. I think we present this in a dispassionate, straightforward manner, and I encourage everyone to watch. It's about 30 minutes.
Hey, thanks, Michael, and thanks for setting me partially straight there.
Partially.
What partially straight because what is a fact is that the Wall Street Journal has attacked Bobby Kennedy just time after time, just dozens and dozens of times, saying that he's damaged public trust, that he's a danger to the country, that he has a long history of spreading falsehoods. Those are direct quotes. So, there is that side of it, but it's really nice to hear that there's some redeeming qualities and that they're doing really, really good work. And I think that it really is critical for all of us to, be open to organizations changing and also to the idea that organizations get some things right and some things wrong and are imperfect and and to see the redeeming quality in it and to hope that they can see more and learn more and be more honest. But you want to have the last word?
Well, the film that I worked on that resulted in the book with you, Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words, was on PBS. We've had 15 films on PBS. I do not endorse most of the things I see on PBS or NPR. You are right. We live in a complicated media world, and we have to, find the way to reach people. And I think for people like us, the goal, look, I think it's important to reach, to preach to the choir, as they like to say. I actually think that's an important thing to do. The choir has to stay, razzed up and enthusiastic, but it's also important to reach the middle. And in order to do that, we have to take advantage of what options are out there. And the Wall Street Journal has been a great partner on this. They've been good on lockdowns. They may not share your view of, Bobby Kennedy, but they share your view of lockdowns. So you're right. It's a picking and choosing. So I think you have a sophisticated view of that, Tony, and I hope the rest of the people on the call do as well.
Definitely. And, we all have to be willing to, recognize that the world is just filled with contradictions and that, we just have to take the best that we can take and, fight the parts of it that we disagree with. So thanks for coming on. Great to hear of your new work and hope to work with you more in the future.
I hope so too. Thank you, Tony.
Next up, we have Mary Holland, and she's the CEO of the incredible nonprofit Children's Health Defense. She's a prolific writer, former professor at NYU School of Law, and she's been fighting to protect children's health for something like 25 years. And she joins us today to shed light on the censorship of Children's Health Defense and, many of the groups that she's been part of and the legal battles that she's fought over many, many years to defend free speech and to hold those people who deny us that accountable. So great to have you back on, Mary.
Tony, thanks so much. And as you said at the beginning, this starts in the United States with the First Amendment. We just want them to hold true to what is a foundational principle for our country. And not every country has a First Amendment. Many countries do have laws that are much more restrictive than here. But we do have, as a First Amendment issue, no abridgment of freedom of speech or of the press. And I also want to make the point that the propaganda and censorship always go together. It's censorship of the truth, it's censorship of the disfavored narrative, and then it's propaganda of whatever is the favored narrative. And I just want to point out a particular example. We were just in Washington, D.C. with Senator Ron Johnson a couple weeks ago, and he's been trying to get out information about a report that he did April 29, the mainstream media has still not picked this up. It's a Senate report, an unmasked report about what happened at the FDA, about how absolutely they knew that their algorithms to pick up safety signals did not work, and they didn't want them fixed. And they told the scientist who kept insisting, your algorithms don't work, they told her to cease and desist. And that, by suppressing that science, that enabled the FDA to say, falsely, oh, we don't know about any safety signals, and to include then the false narrative, oh, these shots are safe and effective. So specifically about Children's Health Defense, we started being censored before COVID, which certainly gives you some ideas about potential premeditation. We started to be severely censored in the summer of 2019. Our Facebook page was deplatformed. We were demonetized. We were thrown off of constant contact. Our Instagram account was deplatformed. But then when the Biden administration came into office, literally within a day, Bobby Kennedy's personal Instagram that had nearly 1 million followers was taken down. And truly, that's when this censorship industrial complex took form. And it was led by a federal agency, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And literally, there were thousands of people working in the federal government and in the social media platforms in particular to censor people like Children's Health Defense, Bobby Kennedy. If MAHA had existed at the time, I'm sure they would have censored MAHA. Fortunately, Jay Bhattacharya and others were plaintiffs in the lawsuit that the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana brought in a case called Missouri v. Biden. It's now been settled. But that was the case about the censorship of dis, and malinformation that the government was very explicit about. Through the disclosures, through the discovery in that case, we saw the email traffic between the White House and these social media platforms, where the White House would say, well, just take it down. We don't care if it's truthful. We know it's truthful. In essence, they said, we know people are going to die with our false propaganda, but you need to take it down. So even though Children's Health Defense is really about protecting children from toxic environmental exposures, like many of the ingredients in vaccines, aluminum, mercury, live viruses, unregulated wireless radiation, pesticides like glyphosate, we could not do our work without challenging the censorship and without challenging the propaganda. And so over the last several years, we have sued Meta Platforms that controls Facebook and Instagram. We sued the Biden administration. We sued the Trusted News Initiative that incorporates the Washington Post, the Associated Press, the BBC. We sued the state of California. We sued the Washington Doctors Medical Board. We've represented people like Dr. Paul Merrick, Meryl Nass, Pierre Corey, who spoke earlier, in protecting them from the medical boards. We've won some, we've lost some, and several cases are still ongoing. But one thing is for absolute certain, we cannot give up the right to free speech. If we do, as you said at the beginning, Tony, it's all over. We cannot have a free society without free speech. We will not have health freedom if we don't have freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. And, thanks for all the great work that you've done. You've just been such an incredible warrior for free speech, for children's health. You've sued all the right people. I hope that you win every one of those. I hope the ones that you didn't win, you go back and you beat them the second time. Just incredible work, and just proud to know you and to have worked with you just a little bit. And thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, Tony.
Next up, we have Dr. Eric Berg, and he's known as the Knowledge Doc, and he's earned that title by becoming a globally recognized health teacher to over 45 million followers on just a whole bunch of platforms. And he's been doing this for about 30 years, and he's helped people to begin to comprehend how their bodies work. Because this whole sort of propaganda and censorship leads people to think that the only way that they get hurt is by genetics, and that the only way that they can get healthy is through drugs. So he's been giving people practical strategies to get more healthy, to become healthy after all of this poisoning that's happened to all of us. And so it's he's just an incredible thinker, writer, researcher, and he's a visionary. He's been really backing MAHA, and he's now writing an incredible new book, a groundbreaking book, and it's called let me grab the book. It's called Change Your Environment. Here it is. And just a spectacular book. And there are just a lot of small steps that people have to take to take their lives back, to take their health back. and to recognize what's happened to them over all these years. So welcome, Dr. Berg. Thanks for coming on again.
Thanks so much, Tony. Definitely want to get that book myself. That's looks like a great one. Yeah, but we're just ready to publish that very soon. We're almost there. Last spring, something strange happened online I want to share with everyone. The moment Robert F. Kennedy moved to pull soda off the food stamp thing, a wave of influencers, dozens of them, just blew up their feeds overnight, outraged, all trying to defend soda. And I'm like, these are like dietitians. These are health gurus defending soda all at the same time within the same 48 hours. I found that very odd. Almost every one of them just happened to mention the same thing, that President loves Diet Coke. I'm like, oh, interesting. This is probably not a grassroots reaction. This is a script. And if you pull the string on it, it comes from a PR firm that has been quietly texting influencers their talking points and offering, at the very bare minimum, $1,000 a post. But if you are a larger influencer, you can get 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, even up to 500,000 or more per post. And I'm not kidding. It's like a lot of money involved in this. So and the problem is their posts are not mentioning that they're being paid. So unfortunately, it's like you got to be suspicious of these posts because it all seemed to be attacking at the same time. But here's what people need to understand. This is like the normal now, and online influence is the product. You can buy it by the post. And the overwhelming majority of marketers now run influencing or influencer campaigns. It's a multi-billion-dollar machine. I've had many people reach out to me to pay me tens of thousands of dollars to push certain things. And I'm like, I'm not into that. I do not take any of that. But there's a lot of influencers that do. And it's not a problem, but the problem is you have to disclose it. Okay. So when an industry, corporate giants are threatened, a lot of times they're not going to just run an ad because ads don't work anymore. So they rent influencers that look like your neighbor or your friend or a relative. But the FTC made a rule for this. It's in law. So if you are paid to promote something, you have to say it clearly every single time. It has to say ad, sponsored, that simple. The question is this happening? Well, there's one analysis I looked at, more than 100 million posts, okay, found that 96% of the sponsored content was not properly disclosed. And so take a wild guess at what group was the worst at following the rules. Yes, you guessed it, was health and wellness influencers, the exact people flooding your feed with all sorts of recommendations for your health. So when you start scrolling through and you see someone pushing something, some agenda, something that seems pretty odd, realize that it's probably not their opinion. It could be someone else's opinion. So the FTC now can fine violators more than $50,000 per post. So a wellness company called Teamy got hit with a $15 million judgment for exactly this. They were paying influencers who didn't come clean. So there is a law on this. We just need them to, answer one question. Are you being paid to say that? That's really what this is about, because the real threat to MAHA is not about the debate. It's kind of about, it's difficult to tell who's really debating, who's behind it. But the FTC right now is very looking into this, and they're cracking down on this disclosure law. So if you are an influencer watching this, you really, and you want to avoid the $50,000 per post violation, you might want to start following the law. Thank you very much, Tony.
That is great to hear, great to get out there. $50,000 per post, and then 96% were not disclosing. I mean, it's just crazy. Makes me think of that time, I don't know, it was maybe 20 years ago when Bloomberg wanted to to make it so that children couldn't have 16-ounce sodas in school. They could only have 12-ounce sodas. So, it's not a huge deal. It's a gradual change, but clearly good for children, right? This just outpouring of anger of people from all different places, all different newspapers coming out and saying, oh, this is an incredible threat to freedom, to our freedom to choose, the freedom of our children. Now, who on earth could believe that there's any kind of free speech question, there's any kind of freedom question? This is the freedom of companies to poison our children. That's the only freedom we were looking to protect there. And I would bet that your view there, that many of these people, maybe all of them, were just getting paid to have those points of view. Because the only people who could reasonably and realistically have those points of view are the companies making 16-ounce sodas.
Exactly.
So anyway, thank you. Thank you for the great work that you've done and for all the help you've been to MAHA.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
Next up, we have Senator Rand Paul, and he is another just incredible freedom fighter, fighter for justice, fighter to hold Dr. Fauci accountable. He's a senator from the great state of Kentucky, and he's fought for free speech, medical freedom, to protect real science and science that serves the public, not the private. Not corrupt science, not corporate science, but science that is real, that is performed to help the public. So Senator Paul is a strong backer of the goals and principles of the MAHA movement, and he's the author of an incredible book, Deception: The Great COVID Cover-Up. Thanks, Rand, for coming on again.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me. We've got big news this week. On Monday, I sent a subpoena to Dr. Anthony Fauci. We've subpoenaed him to come testify before the Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. This subpoena comes after months of back and forth discussions with Fauci's attorneys regarding our efforts to have him come voluntarily to testify. Unfortunately, he promised he would do so, and then he reneged at the last moment. So the subpoena is now necessary to try to get him to testify. This is about the origins, and it's about the cover-up and his involvement in covering up what the origins were and his funding of the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope to ask him about the circumstances surrounding his unprecedented auto pen pardon. One might have to look back even to Richard Nixon's preemptive pardon to find such a generous protection from prosecution. I find it hard to believe that Dr. Fauci was not in communication with the Biden administration staff regarding the terms of his pardon. I also plan to make the case that Dr. Fauci perjured himself during his 2024 testimony to Congress. During his testimony, Dr. Fauci denied communications with intelligence officials regarding the origin of the COVID-19 virus. My investigation, along with documents from former Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, directly contradicts the statements that Anthony Fauci made to Congress. I'm often asked by supporters why Dr. Fauci hasn't been prosecuted given the weight of evidence against him. I've issued multiple referrals, though, to have him prosecuted, multiple referrals to the Department of Justice for him to be prosecuted. The Senate, though, doesn't have the power to try Anthony Fauci. I don't have any prosecutorial power, but I hope this subpoena moves us closer to testing the validity of his pardon. Dr. Fauci's track record of equivocating on the definition of gain-of-function research and ordering the destruction of government records leads me to believe that a grand jury could easily indict him for a crime. I hope Dr. Fauci decides to comply with the subpoena and set the record straight for the American people in July. He finally can tell the truth about whether the COVID-19 pandemic was a preventable accident enabled by the U.S. government's funding decisions, and particularly Anthony Fauci's funding decisions to fund this dangerous research in Wuhan. I'm looking forward to next month, and we'll keep you up to date.
Thank you so much. And, clearly Fauci has to be, forced to testify. We have to get to the bottom of what happened. It seems unquestionable that he lied to the public, that he perjured himself, that he destroyed documents, that he knew so much more than he disclosed. And, the idea that could ever be pardoned preemptively is just goes against every principle that this country stands on. So, I'm personally just incredibly grateful for the work you've done to make sure that this doesn't just disappear from history, because people need to know what happened. People need to know what Dr. Fauci did. And I think it's still possible. And I think you are our greatest hope in getting there. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It is a beautiful thing. So thank you for joining us for yet another Maha Media Hub, and for tuning in week after week. I'm going to keep this really short because it's been kind of a long show. But let me just say that so many of the people who are watching today have suffered and have been deplatformed and have stood up to some of these powerful forces, some of the most powerful forces on the planet, and they've done it, and they've suffered. Their families have suffered. Their livelihoods have suffered. So, anything that anybody watching this can do to help those people, to read their books, watch their documentaries, learn the stories, spread the stories, so that, the whole world knows what happened, so that we can be sure that it never happens in the future. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week, Wednesday, 4 p.m.
America's children are sick, and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises, long past. Now is a time for action. Maha is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. Maha's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
Maha is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
It is a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at Maha Action.